Do we need to do the rules or?
No, I
Sure,
think
well,
we're all good.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll stop talking if that's the case.
go ahead,
Anyway, so this week we just read Parshat Yitro, or as you guys call it, Jethro. And it has two main, like two halves, right? The parsha. The first half is the whole story of Yitro coming to help his son-in-law, and the other half is the Ten Commandments. I'm assuming in previous years we probably focused more on the Ten Commandments, as it's like a kind of more famous. So I decided to do the first half, the Yitro half. And I was starting to think about it about 2 weeks ago. And then they announced this special event in my synagogue just for this past Shabbos that really kind of tied in. So I was like extra happy, and I want to tell you a little bit about it. So there is this rabbi in my neighborhood. He's a former New Yorker rabbi, and he made Aliyah. He lives down the street from here. He made Aliyah about 10 years ago, 10 years ago. And he started this organization to connect between Jews and Druze. Now the Druze people, they see themselves as the descendants of Jethro, and he's their prophet, just like Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov is for us. So it's kind of like a thing to do on Parashat Yitro, to do something recognizing that. So he's always doing some kind of event, and this year with the war going on, so he did something a bit different. So he brought 4 families and like extended families, about 50 people, all from up north, probably neighbors of Yair somewhere. They all live up north in Israel for some reason. So he brought 4 families, and
That's where his grave is,
right. That's their base. So he brought those 4 families, and there were 4 families. They all lost a family member in the recent war, and he brought all of them to the neighborhood. They came to for the prayers with us on Friday night, and then we had like this kind of ceremony in the middle and talking. It was really very meaningful. And then it kind of went to like host families for the meal, and in the morning they went to a different synagogue. So it was very meaningful, and I think I want to show something which was I bought it on paper because I just took it from the synagogue, so I hope I can show it to you. I don't know if you guys probably can't see anything now.
Can we pin Jonathan?
Yeah.
Kim, can you make Jonathan like the main? I guess you have to stop sharing so we can see your
Okay,
screen bigger.
I'll stop sharing.
Okay. Hold on. What do we need, Gabriel?
All right.
We want
No.
If you feature him, he'll be bigger on people's screens. Continue.
Now, I don't know if you can see that the top half of the page I'm holding is having a special prayers that Jews say.
Jonathan, hold on, Jonathan.
Yeah.
We can't see anything.
I know.
We're looking at them.
I can see it.
I see okay.
I started to see it too. And you can simply pin his
He is pinned. I've pinned him.
Yeah, but the host has to make him for everybody.
Yeah, you can make me
hold
bigger.
on. I'm sorry. Just give me 1 second. I keep hitting the wrong button. I apologize.
No problem.
And I'm going to hit the right button right now. And I am going to make Gabriel the co-host so he can pin it. Okay, Gabriel. I've never done that, so I don't want to.
Here we go. It's called Spotlight.
Okay, yeah, I'll have to keep looking.
Now everybody's.
Oh, thanks, Gabriel. I didn't know.
Okay. So I don't know. So now you can see better?
Yeah.
Okay, so the top half is a prayer that Jews says every Shabbat morning. It's part of the prayer book, and it's a prayer for we are praying for God to keep the soldiers safe. And in the bottom half,
Nowadays we say it twice a day in our
sure,
synagogue.
yeah, and in the bottom half, I don't know if you can see, that's the same prayer translated into Arabic. In Arabic letters. Now that was the first time I saw, prayer for the soldiers in Arabic. I don't know, I thought it was very, very interesting. And it was part of the ceremony we did for them, for those families. And then a few of those gentlemen spoke, which is, by the way, I think it's the first time I seen like in the middle of the prayers, in the middle of the synagogue, from like the rabbi's spot, like a non-Jew speaks, like in the synagogue, in the middle of the prayers, not as like an outside thing. So it was very unique. So this gentleman spoke, and he's an older Druze gentleman. He used to be an Israeli parliament member back in the day. And he just recently lost a nephew, I think, or somebody in the war.
Was his name Ayab Kub? Was his Ayab? Do you know what his name was?
I'm so bad with names. I can barely remember that you are Dean. Anyway, I can find out later. He was saying that he was talking about the connection between Druze and Jews. And I think it was very tying into like what we do here in eNoam. And he said, I think the most meaningful thing he said that today it's not just the best, Israel is not just the best place to be a Jew in, but it's also the best place to be a Druze in. He was speaking about that, how the connection between the Jews and the Jewish people, and I thought that was very meaningful. So it's all connected really to what I'm going to say. So with that in mind, I'm going to share the actual slides. Okay, are we good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so housekeeping, I don't think we need. Parsha summary. Okay, so the name of the Parsha is Yitro, means Jethro. It's in Exodus 18. Now the first half, as we said, it's Moses' father-in-law Jethro. He hears all the great miracles that God is performing, and he decides to leave his people, Midian, and he was the high priest, and he bring Moses' wife, his daughter, and his two granddaughters, Moses' kids, and he's going to look for the Israelites. And he starts giving advice. He becomes this advisor to Moses, right? And he gives him all those advices about how to build the hierarchy for the judges and all of those things. That's the first half. And then there is the whole part of Israel getting the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai, getting ready, and all of those things. The shofar, the lights, God appearing, from the smoke and from the light. And then of course there is the 10 Commandments. I don't think we need to. We all know them, right? So obviously, one of the most important parashot, in all the year. So that's just kind of a little summary of the parsha. I wrote a little bit of a summary about the Druze people, because I don't think a lot of people like really knows, who they are and what they are. So they are Arabic. They are Arabs. They speak Arabic.
It's secret.
What?
It's somewhat secret. They keep
Yeah.
only their clergy.
Yeah, a lot of their practices and rituals are secret. But they see themselves as descendants of Jethro. But they also believe in a lot of the biblical, figures. They see them all as important people in their beliefs too. Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad. They are all kind of part of their tradition in different ways. They are about 2 million people, maybe 1 million, something like that. And they live around the northern part of Israel and, Lebanon and Syria, all of those areas. And at least the ones that are in Israel, they are very loyal to Jews. They serve in the army. They become parliament member. They're active members of the Israeli society. And they're very proud of it. Like all those people that came to our synagogue on Friday night, they were all so proud of their family members in the army and doing all kinds of important things. It's really a big part of their beliefs. And they also believe that Jethro was Moses' non-Jewish father. They also realize that, and they have a different name for him, of course, in their tradition, but they realize it's the same person. I think that's the basics. Yeah, I think that's the main thing. Now the first half, I kind of showed a little bit of resemblance between the story of Amalek and the story of Yitro. Now, at least in the Jewish world, a lot of rabbis says that the story of Jethro didn't actually happen immediately after Amalek. It happened a bit later, but the Torah put it immediately after Amalek to show us all kinds of things. But chronologically speaking, it didn't happen immediately after. So there is a bunch of languages and words and stuff like that that are kind of hinting on the connection between Amalek and Jethro. I just brought two, but there is a bunch more. For example, in the story of Amalek, it says that Moses' hands grew heavy, and in the story of Jethro, it said that he's saying to Moses that this task is going to be too heavy. Just one example, and the second example that I brought, that Moses is telling Yehoshua to pick people to fight Amalek, and also in the story of Jethro, Moshe is picking people, for all the judges and all of those things. But there is many more examples. I just brought two just to kind of show it. That's what I have to say. I wrote a few questions, but as you guys know in eNoam, we're always welcome to add our own questions in our own discussions. So the first question I wrote was, Jethro was a priest of a different religion. Why did Moshe rush to accept his advice? And what is the important point that Moshe explains, and how does Jethro incorporate into his advice? That's question number one. Question number two, why does the Torah attach the story of Jethro to Amalek? Can you think of other parallels between the stories? And what should we learn from it? Meaning, what should we learn from the fact that it's attached to each other? And question number three is, at the beginning of the Parsha, Yitro comes to Moshe on his own will, and he stays to help. But at the end of the story, he was sent back, right? It said that Moshe kind of sent him back. So why? What can we learn from the fact that he arrived right on his own, and from the fact that he was sent back home at the end? That's my questions. Yeah, that's it.
Sounds good. A lot to think about there. Good stuff.
Lots of good questions.
Kim, I think we're ready for the breakout rooms. If you want to,
Thank you, Jonathan.
lead us into a little review summary of what you guys delved into.
Yeah, I will, even though I didn't take notes this time, but we had a really, really good discussion, and we went off to different things. We started off really looking at some of the questions and delving into the connection between the Druze people, and them being connected to, Jethro and Moshe. So I did raise the point that in Numbers, we have a slightly different slant, and it's not clear that Jethro actually, it goes back to his people. He may have acquiesced to Moses's request to stay. We have two different, and that's kind of ambivalent also perhaps with the connection of the Druze people and the Israelites and the Jewish people in Israel today. There's kind of a loyalty, and yet they're not the same, and there are these ambivalences. And Yonatan really also raised the idea that there may be just the same narrative with different kind of stress. Okay, we had some really interesting conversation that Rick mentioned about the contrast between Amalek and between Jethro. That Jethro is very other-centered, whereas Amalek is very selfish and self-centered. We spoke about the difference between the fact that, well, Lorraine mentioned that it reminded her of the story of Yael and Sisera, and how Yael was courageous and took the part of even though she was not from the nation of Israel, how she helped the people and saved them. We had Rick talking about, very interesting, how Jethro helped Moshe find a better way of doing something. And we had a discussion about when you help someone that way, when God told Moshe, when Moshe decided to delegate, right? Was that diminishing his spirit or not? And perhaps it's more like the ocean, or more like a candle, that when you give of your spirit, you don't get your spirit diminished, you just increase it for others. So help me out here, anyone, to remind me. We had a lot of talk about what it says about both of them, the greatness of both sides of Yitro, and I think, Yonatan, that was you, the greatness of both sides, both of Yitro and of Moshe, that they were able to help each other and teach each other all the years. And we sort of ended with the fact, Eve spoke about that each can choose, right? You can choose to be Amalek, or you can choose to be Yitro. And we sort of ended with the idea that it was very interesting that Moshe went through many changes and many cultures, right? He was both a Midianite and an Egyptian and an Israelite. And that was part of his greatness, that he was able to be this great leader because he had gone through so many changes, and that we ourselves can also change and be transformed. But throw in more things, because I'm sure I forgot a lot.
Sounds good. I want to say, Yonatan, you prepared the slides. Was there anything in the discussion that was different for you, that came up in your room, that someone else brought up, something that you?
Well, we started talking about the story of Jethro in Bamidbar, which I was not. It was not my intention, but always adding interesting point of view. That's always good.
Okay, excellent questions.
Yeah, good.
But I've got to say that in the beginning, Ruth shared pictures of Nabi Shweb, and we remembered and I remember, Dean, how we went together there, and it was so fascinating that we learned about the Druze people and about their connection to the Jewish people. So thank you, Dean, for that, and Lorraine, and Ruth.
I remember. All right, room 2 sounds good. That's a good transition. So we had my dad, Dean Bai, Yair, and Jane or Catherine Yatuket. I think, Hadass, you're listed in that room, but you were in our room. So did you guys only have 4 people in the room? I think
we had Yoav too.
Yoav. Yes. Wonderful. Good stuff.
And my wife in hiding.
In hiding, I see.
Yeah.
She's in the bush in the back of your picture there, I see.
She was like Jethro, hiding, yes.
You guys, do you have any thoughts to share? Anything?
Yoav, would you like to summarize, perhaps? Or we're catching you too much on, by surprise?
Gosh, we covered a lot of ground. But I can do. Oh boy, I can do my best. I'm trying to like think all the way back to where we started. Um, oh man.
I know
Well, we
it's hard.
started.
I'm a
I've been in your
bit like
shoes.
We
I didn't take
started with
notes, so go ahead.
Jethro being really playing such an important role in the development of Moshe, because he had so many years to grow up as part of a family of someone who was a great leader. That Jethro was. He was the leader of a nation that was very different in spirit from the leader Pharaoh, who Moshe also grew up in his house. So he was able to see the contrast between two different forms of leadership. And Jethro was a true truth seeker in God, and so Moses really wanted to draw from the tremendous experience that Jethro had, and Jethro did indeed impart. Then we had a really interesting discussion that was raised by Daniel, who, what was it that really convinced Jethro that God is greater than all the other gods? We noticed that in the verse it says "Ki badavar shel zadu alehem," which means that because they were punished by the same deeds that they did to the Israelites, and finding that God dealt with those with evil. For example, the fact that they threw Israelite children into the Nile, and then they're not able to drink water from the Nile because it's full of blood. So we have this sense of that everything that God does is just, and everything that God does is to educate. It's really to help us understand the circumstances of the mistakes that we make. And I think that was what struck Jethro in the stories that Moshe told him.
Yeah, there was another aspect also. Yes, of course, the justice of God was probably the most, what he said, but it is how God, did his justice, how he rendered that justice.
Right.
I mean, God could have taken all the Israelites from Egypt and moved them miraculously onto the desert, but no, he did not. He did not. There was a whole process. And throughout the process, God was there with them. Just, I don't know, but if I had been there and, learn about the fact that this God of the Israelite opened the Red Sea, well, it puts something in you that God is something different than the other God, because there was something so powerful, so miraculous, so great, so wonderful that he was performing, to save the Israelite, and he never stopped. He never stopped, leading the Israelite in the desert. Yeah.
Right.
What's
And then we thank you so much for that. Then we also spoke about how the process that God seems to be leading us through is not just a process for Israel, it's really for all the nations. Even the fact that Jethro is mentioned here in the Parsha where we received the Torah suggests that and it's called Jethro, that's the name of the Parsha. So the giving of the Torah is clearly not just for Israel, it's for all the nations. And he's already bringing some nations into the right kind of relationship with Israel. In this case, it's Jethro, or the Keni, as we know from later on in other stories in the Tanakh. So we have here a process that is really for the entire humankind. And with that, Dean brought in this matter of, he reminded us that next week, when this is his promo, I guess, because you're giving it, right, Dean? So next week in the Haftorah, he talks about how not only will the Jews, will Israel and the nations be coming together, but they will actually be doing it on Shabbat and on Rosh Chodesh, on the beginning of each month, not just on nice. You already have the slides. All flesh will come to worship me, and it'll be much more often than once a year in Sukkot. It'll be actually every Shabbat and every new moon. And he reminded me that since we are really destined to serve God together in this manner, perhaps we have a responsibility to also call out to God together, because we know from the story of Egypt that it's when Israel called out to God that God, it's like as if God also knows, he's also wise in timing things in the way that they will be the most effective. And things are the most effective when people want to be saved and God saves them. But if they're not calling out to God, if we're not calling out to God, come and do what we all want you to do, then he waits until we do. So perhaps, so Dean was suggesting, or I was suggesting, because this is something that Dean and I discussed when in his last days here in Israel, that we have to find a way for Israel and the nations together to cry out to God to come and do what has to be done.
And just to add to that, this togetherness is, and Yair really made that point to me on the 2 occasions I got to spend with him last week, that it can't be done with just Jews. Even if all Jews perfected the Torah, it still wouldn't have the fullness of God's plans couldn't happen. Or if all Gentiles decided to worship God from one new moon to other, one Sabbath to other, we perfected Torah. That we would both be falling short of God's glory. That in the heart of God, Hashem, is He wants us to do there's things that we have to do together. And I think I'm challenged more and more as I read the Word of God, is to take a look at scriptures. I used to say that was just for Jews, or that's just for the nations, but to invite the question, is that something we're supposed to do together? Is that reflective of the purposes and plans and the destiny of a holy God of Israel and the nations? Is that He's looking for us to do that together? And as Yair is saying, there's a crying out that we have to do together. And you see that in Joel chapter 2 really clearly. And there's other places too. Anyway, that's I love this togetherness.
Well, this is the right Parsha to bring it up, for sure. It fits. All right, so let's do room 3. We still have a little bit more time. So in our room, we had Christina Hunt, we had Ava, Eve, and then we had myself, Paul, Phoebe, as well as Hadass. She was with us in room. I did take a few notes, but I didn't necessarily catch everything. I'll start with my notes, and then please, those who are in the room with me, you can jump in. We started on question 1, and Hadass started sharing about how Moshe would have, she was theorizing on how Moshe would have seen Jethro as a father. And he lived with him for 40 years before getting into this whole Exodus ordeal. And so there's a lot of relationship there. There's a lot of water under the bridge. And so he really looked up he had a respect for him, honor for him that you see in this Parsha reading, where all of a sudden he comes and gives him advice, and there's just you can clearly see that there's a respect and there's a valuing of his opinion there, and that seems to come out here. One thing after that, I brought up, because we were looking at your questions, Jonathan, and this idea of the Druze and Yitro and Moshe, and you'd mentioned that Yitro was from a different religion, and I was kind of thinking on this idea that we have to look at these people in their time. So the idea that Moshe was coming out of Egypt, and that there was a certain understanding of the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and there was still a lot of revelation to come, because they're just about to enter into the Sinai experience. And so, Jethro's understanding of God and Moshe's understanding of God. And so there's this intercommunication, this discussion that you see where, they're having a genuine conversation. It's not one side just saying to the other, listen, you know nothing, you're just, completely deluded. Let me just inform you. You can just see that there's a cross communication between the two. And so we have to read that in the context of its time. It's not Druze and Jewish talking to each other. It's Jethro and Moshe, and they were both, it was much more primordial in their understanding, I think. And so that's just something that I think is helpful, because I think it is accurate. And then
with
Paul
lots
brought
of
in
love.
with lots of love, an important spice in the dish to make it tasty. So Paul brought in that Yitro, in his thoughts, that Yitro, Jethro had proven himself to Moshe, and so Moshe really trusted him when Yitro came to try to help him and saw that he was overburdened. So that was part of what Paul shared. I know there were some other good nuggets that we had in there that are not coming up in my head, but I guess you'll have to pay a price for not being in the room with us, because then we just get to have the really nice conversation.
We get to watch the video afterwards.
Okay, one more little thing, and then we will end. Was just this question of, Jonathan, thank you for bringing up this question of Amalek in contrast to Jethro, because we started looking into the words. For example, when it said that Moshe chose able, the English translation was able people or able men, and in the Hebrew it was anashim chayil.
Anshe Chayil.
Yeah, but then as soon as I saw that, I saw the chayal is from the same root, I'm presuming, and so which then soldier, which then connects to the Amalek kind of comparison, right? Where the Yehoshua was collecting soldiers to fight Amalek, and I thought that doing justice on the earth, is there any greater war than that? In terms of and that's what Moshe was doing. That's what Jethro was helping Moshe to do, was to set up essentially an army to do justice, right? To bring a very fair and equitable and also tolerable burden of doing justice together, sharing it together in levels. So that was something that came out from Yonatan's emphasis. So yeah, thank you for that. Well, unless anyone has a last message to share, we can wish each other a happy week. Shavua Tov.
And thank you for such a great job. Thank you all.